Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Johnson, and welcome again to another MassMEDIC virtual program. Today, we're bringing you once again our supplier showcase. This is our regular checkup on the supply chain for Medtech, on the suppliers that provide Medtech with the tools and technologies that they use every day. I'm thrilled to come to you again with another really great program. Today is packed. So I'm gonna just jump right in really quickly to our program. But first, I just want to welcome you again and say that our supplier showcase is brought to you by Thermo Fisher Scientific, Steripac, Weedman, and today our host sponsor QAD. These folks help bring this content to us, and we are very grateful for their support. You know, this is our second supplier showcase where we're looking very deeply at the supply chain for Medtech. I think you can't pick up a newspaper these days or, you know, even think about any industry and technology without discussing the pathway by which the raw materials get to manufacturers, and then how those manufacturers get those products to the customers. We're experiencing, I think, a pretty unprecedented interruption in the supply chain. So we're bringing you today a really exciting briefing from the Department of Commerce, and then follow that with a panel, and then we'll have a reverse pitch as usual. So real quick program note, we're gonna have, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A tab or in the chat screen. We will monitor those during the discussions and ask them as we have, and ask them to our guests as we have time. But first up on our program is Sri Ramaswamy. He's a senior advisor to the Secretary of Commerce. And Kevin Coyne, he's with the Bureau of Industry and Security. And they're both going to give us a briefing on how the Biden administration is looking at this supply chain challenge. Sri, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you take it away. Tell us what's happening, and I'll hang out here and monitor the questions for you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. And thank you all for the opportunity. Good morning. My name is Sri. I've been with the Commerce Department now for the last 8 months or so. I am, as Brian said, a senior advisor to the Commerce Secretary, and my portfolio covers semiconductors and supply chain resiliency. And so, as you can imagine, it's been a busy few months. I'm here, Kevin and I are here because we wanted to talk a little bit about the supply chain challenges, particularly with relation to the semiconductor chip shortage. We want to talk a little bit about our perspective and some of the actions that we've been taking, and you know, where the situation is right now. Back in April and then in May, first the President and then the Commerce Secretary convened a number of industry CEOs across the semiconductor supply chain. And the goal of that initial convening was to talk a little bit about the supply chain shortages in semiconductor chips, try to understand qualitatively what was going on, where some of the gaps were, both in terms of the supply and the demand for chips of different sorts. And medical equipment was one of the industries that was represented in those convenings. What came out of those convenings were a couple of main points. One was a sense from the industry that the chip shortage is quite diverse, in the sense that there are many types of chips and many types of products that are all in shortage for a number of reasons. What also came out of those convenings was a sense that the second quarter of this year was going to be the trough. It was going to be the worst of the lot, and that things would slowly start to improve after that. And there was some discussion, some debate about how long it would take to get back to normal. Some people thought it might be the end of this year. Some people thought it would be the end of next year. But by and large, there was a consensus that Q2 was going to be the bottom of the trough, and then things would start to improve slowly. We left those convenings with a message to the private sector. The Secretary in particular conveyed that message quite clearly, was that we expected the private sector to lead the resolution of the chip shortage, to try to find ways to improve transparency in the supply chain, both in terms of the supply and the components, and in terms of the demand, and kind of the, you know, increasing the trust and transparency of the demand signals. what we found since then is that there have been a number of instances of companies working directly with suppliers in ways that they had not done in the past. We've certainly seen, for instance, examples of customers and suppliers who were typically separated by 2 or 3 layers of the supply chain historically, were starting to talk directly to each other to try to improve some of the trust and communication through the supply chain. What we did see, however, was the fact that Q2 was not necessarily the worst of the crisis, and that Q3 was continuing to be just as bad, or in some cases, it was starting to get worse. And so in September, the Commerce Secretary convened another round of CEOs. And again, the medical equipment folks were part of that convening. And during that time, or actually, so prior to those convenings, we've also had some very extensive one-on-one industry engagement, both with individual companies and with associations such as this one. And we've tried to learn as well what some of the gaps have been. And so the goal of the September convening was to bring the industry back together, try to understand what has been tried, what has been learned about the chip shortage and the demand and supply imbalances and the new outlook. One of the things that was confirmed in that convening and also in prior conversations was the fact that there was some pretty significant information gaps up and down the supply chain. And those information gaps pertain to how much production was actually going on at different types of chips, what capacity that existed, what was the utilization of that capacity, where was that capacity going, what were the inventory levels of various types of chips or microelectronic components, and also on the demand side, what kinds of orders were being placed, how do those orders change from last year to this year, what were the new orders being placed for the next year. There just seemed to be a lot of information gaps across those different types of information on both demand and supply. And so one of the things that the Commerce Department has done coming out of that September convening is to issue a request for information to the industry. And that is one of the things that we wanted to talk about here today. It is a voluntary request for information from the industry, from across the supply chain, including customers such as the folks who are on this call. But obviously, it's not just the customers. We're asking tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers of components. We're asking the semiconductor wafer manufacturers, the component manufacturers, the packagers, testers, the distributors of chips and components. We are asking all of those folks to respond to the RFI. It is, like I said, a voluntary RFI. The request for information generally is split into 2 broad buckets of questions. One that is geared primarily towards customers to try to understand from the customer standpoint what sorts of components you folks feel are the biggest pain points and how that has been changing over time, and what are you hearing from your suppliers, and how are your orders being matched with supply, and how are your orders changing over time. The second set of questions is to the suppliers and the distributors, and that's really about trying to understand what sorts of capacity exists, what are the inventory levels, what are the utilization levels, what are they seeing in terms of their own supply chain of parts and components and equipment that might be worsening some of these issues. We know generally that because the inventory has been tight, the supply chain is primed for successive shocks, and we've seen some of those successive shocks, right? Whether they are weather events in Texas, fires in Japan, COVID shutdowns in Malaysia, now power issues in China. So that is unfortunate, and one of the things we've also tried to do as an administration is set up an early warning system, which is a way to get direct notification of shutdowns in different parts of the world, particularly when it comes to COVID-related shutdowns. But of course, these are, we have been receiving notifications of much of other reasons as well. And the goal there is to just make sure that at least that shutdown information flows quickly through the supply chain so that people have more time to prepare for a potential disruption in supply. But on the RFI itself, it is one of our objectives is to try to provide more information and try to understand for ourselves a little bit more in quantitative terms, where are some of the biggest pain points? And that's a way for us to inform both immediate discussions with the private sector and also our own long-term investments through the CHIPS Act. One of the concerns we have is, with 52 billion of funding potentially coming to commerce for the CHIPS Act, we would like to make sure that those investments are well directed and targeted. And part of that requires us to have a better understanding of true demand and true supply, so we can make sure that we're not inadvertently oversupplying the industry or undersupplying and causing, and sort of exacerbating shortages for years down the road. The goal of the RFI is definitely not, and the Secretary has made this clear, it is not for Commerce to step in and make allocation decisions. That is not our business, and we have no interest in doing that. But it is very much in the spirit of partnership with the private sector to try to make sure that whatever gaps we are seeing and whatever we are hearing from the industry about their own challenges in trying to clarify information, that we're able to respond to that. I'm going to pause there. Kevin, anything that you'd like to add to that?
I think I just want to highlight, obviously there are any privacy concerns around this voluntary data set that we've asked. The big things being, when we do collect data that is of a proprietary nature, we tag it as a controlled unclassified information, and it receives certain protections under the law. Trade Secrets Act, Privacy Act, it obviously receives appropriate tagging of the information as business proprietary, business confidential. We also, it exempts it from Freedom of Information Act request from the B4 exemption, because it is proprietary information, is therefore not releasable. Other, obviously, high standard in terms of cybersecurity controls associated with it. So I think that's kind of the big things that we want to just capture, that the data, we do treat the data, recognize it as business proprietary, has effective controls around it, has an appropriate cyber risk framework associated with the data provided, and we do treat it as such. And our goal at the end of the day is to aggregate the data and provide an effective response and reporting out of what really needs, what are we seeing across various industries, across various companies, what is sort of the story that the data is telling us, and how can we articulate that to policymakers and others, so we get a more effective decision set, so we have a better set of data, a better set of facts to kind of go after the problem. Back to you, Sri.
Thanks, Kevin. And I would just close by saying BIS, the bureau that Kevin represents, has a long history of doing industrial-based studies, asking for this sort of proprietary information, and that information has always been well handled. And you can look at some of the reports that BIS has published. You can get a sense of the way some of that information is used in an aggregated form. I would like to open it up for questions, but I will also state, up front, we don't know yet what we are going to find in candid terms, right? The questions are actually quite detailed. We are hopeful that we will get a good response from across the supply chain and from various industries that all have something to do with semiconductor chips. Assuming that information is rich and useful, it is our objective to find a way to communicate that to the industry, so that these sorts of information gaps, we are able to help the private sector address that. What form that will take is still to be determined, and it's a little bit dependent on the kinds of information that we actually do get.
So, Sri, why don't I just jump in here and start peppering some questions? Is that okay with you guys?
Of course.
We have a question from the audience here. Have the convenings spoken about cost pressures, and has there been any discussion of removing some of the tariffs that have also been putting cost pressure on the industry?
The convenings, so CEOs have brought up various factors that have affected the supply chain over the last 2 to 5 years. So they have talked about, technology trends that have changed consumption patterns. They've talked about COVID and work from home and what that has done to demand. And yes, they have talked about tariffs and what that has done, both in terms of the cost of parts and components, the availability of some of these things, and also I think the responses of some of our trading partners and how that may have also exacerbated the chip shortage. So yes, all of that has come up. the convenings have basically been a way for us to hear directly from the CEOs of potential causes and some potential ideas. Now, I would not go so far as to call them solutions, but certainly it has given us a wide set of ideas to consider in terms of what we can do about the situation.
So some questions about process here. Understandably, now you're in sort of information gathering mode. Typically, I mean, how long have you budgeted out in terms of this process? So, and then what comes next in the process once you gather enough data to give you a compelling sort of big picture look at the problem? You know, is there a time frame in terms of when some of that starts becoming working groups or action meetings, things like that?
I can address some of that, Kevin, and you should keep me honest here. It's a 45-day window to respond to the RFI. That window closes on the 8th of November. So we have, roughly about, actually I've forgotten the date today, so roughly about 10 days or 2 weeks to get as much information as we can. I think, to be honest, I mean, knowing this secretary, I mean, she's going to ask, right? The shortage, the chip shortage, the wider supply chain issues have been front and center for her from the very beginning. And so she is going to be asking the team to start to analyze the data, and we're going to start doing that almost immediately. And again, it depends a little bit on what responses we get, and how much richness there is in that data. That's what drives a little bit of the uncertainty, and we don't know yet. Right at this point, all we know is that companies are basically saying. I think we are encouraged by what we're hearing from companies. Several folks have said they are going to respond. Obviously companies have flagged some of these concerns about confidentiality and all of that, but I think that's the reason we're having these sorts of conversations, just to make sure that we address those concerns. But we are hopeful, quite optimistic, in fact, that we're going to get a pretty good response to the RFI. So I would certainly encourage folks on this call to also give us that information, give us your perspective on what's going on. I think in terms of the process, the engagement will continue. I think what we would want to do is figure out what is the right mode of engagement. That's not quite clear yet. Now, some parts of the engagement have been happening at the leadership level with the secretary and the CEOs. There have been several staff level workshops that we have also done. And so it may well be that one of the first things we do is, after a few weeks of analysis, we convene a staff level workshop. It's quite possible. We don't know yet. The broad sense of timing, I think, is, look, this is an ongoing process. I think that's the message I want to convey, right? It's not, I don't think we should be looking at this as a one and done. We're going to get the RFI, we're somehow going to magically find the solution. And then, in 2 months, we're all out of the chip shortage. That's not realistic. It's part of an ongoing process of engagement, of trying to help the private sector figure out how to address the shortage.
And any ideas about moving beyond just the chip shortage? I mean, we're in our industry. I mean, we're experiencing shortages all across the board in terms of raw materials, plastics, resins, silicon. I mean, is this just right now on the chip shortage?
So certainly from a broad microelectronics standpoint, we are asking for all of that information. So we do know that it's not just a chip shortage. We know that substrates are in short supply. We know that ceramic capacitors have been an issue. We know that testing equipment has been a problem. And so we are asking for all of that information as well. Now, beyond the electronic supply chain, of course, there are other issues going on, right? As you said, with certain types of resins, right? Issues with the ports, with logistics. To the extent that those are particularly germane, we would like to hear about them. So there are spaces in the RFI where you can provide qualitative information, comments about additional issues that you're facing. And certainly we would welcome an ongoing dialogue about some of those things as well. One of our colleagues, Ronnie Chatterjee, who's the chief economist at Commerce, is on point for the Supply Chain Disruptions Task Force. And it's been his joy to be working on lumber, steel, ports, logistics, all kinds of those issues. And so certainly, we would welcome, I think, if there are additional concerns that folks want to flag for us, let us know. We're happy to engage.
So Another question here, has anyone looked back in the history to learn when we've had past shortages and what was most useful in the recovery during those periods? Or do you have folks working on that as well?
Yes, we have, and I think we've seen, so it is generally a cyclical industry. We have seen, there were shortages right around the dot-com boom and bust. There were shortages right around the financial crisis 10 years ago. Generally speaking, the consensus view is that this time around is a little bit of a perfect storm kind of situation, where there's multiple factors that are all playing a role in ways that didn't happen the last time. And so obviously, one of the core things is at the end of the day, we're going to need more supply. And that requires more investment, and that's where the incentives come in. And so things like the CHIPS Act will help us there. But we also know that that is a medium-term solution, right? It's going to take time for that capacity to come online. So what we're trying to figure out in the meantime is what can we do to at least get ahead of some of these near-term things so that it's not so disruptive, that we're able to at least kind of manage the supply chain, improve the transparency and the trust, make sure that we get the right amount of supply coming online. Because one of our concerns is that if, we often hear from the supply side of the equation, for instance, that, they don't trust the demand signal. And so that would suggest that even when the supply comes online, there may not be enough of it. And so those are the kinds of things that we can address now, right? Is to make sure that we are putting in place the right things now to make sure we do get out of this chip shortage.
Great. So the response right now to the RFI, I take it that given the amount of outreach, we need to make sure that we get people on this call to fill that out. We'll go ahead and put that in the chat. But I would imagine people are a little worried about putting too much information. You're saying this is all, this is not about sort of naming and shaming. It's about finding out the roots of the problems and then trying to find a solution for the department. Is that? That
Yes.
Seems to be the vibe I'm getting here. And
yes,
if people want to get involved in further discussions, working groups, is there any other way to interact or engage with the department? Maybe in the couple minutes we have left, just maybe give us an idea of how our industry can do a better job of engaging this department.
I think, look, I think this is already helpful. It is definitely not about naming and shaming, but it is about getting as much granular information as possible so we can actually make some informed choices here. Not sure I heard there was a confidential response. It is going to be a confidential response. There are, so we should just address that. And Kevin, maybe we just address this question. I just saw that the question coming in.
Yeah, no, it's confidential. It's business confidential. It's exempt from any sort of Freedom of Information Act requests, FOIA. It's not FOIAble materials. It receives Trade Secret Acts, Privacy Act protections. We fall in this cyber risk security framework under the Federal Information Security Modernization Act. So a lot of risk protocols are put in place. We do about 50 of these a year. 6 to 10 typically contain business proprietary information. So we've got a pretty solid track record of each year going out. This is, I think, a broader picture because it's a broad supply chain across the industry. So we really, we're trying to understand, add transparency, add convening power of government, see what we can do to obviously assist in the short term. So we can't do that without a solid data set. And that's what we're asking. If you do have questions, please write to our email address and the website. And we're happy. We've done a ton of one-on-ones with folks. So if you think you're going to submit, happy to sit down with my team in your company and kind of walk through the survey. If you do have questions and you think you're going to submit, and I would obviously encourage you to submit. If you're hung up on a question or two, please reach out. Please don't wait till November 7th. So if you wouldn't mind, but sooner is better. If you think you're going to respond, and obviously we want your input. It doesn't really get better. You can't add transparency if we don't really know what's going on, with the problems you're facing. So this is your opportunity to kind of tell your story to us. And then obviously when we do have those follow-on engagement sessions, it always helps if you participated, because usually you get an invite to those follow-on sessions. Makes it easier. But work with your association. A lot of associations are submitting as well. But obviously it's that individual, that trend analysis. What are you seeing across the industry telling the story. Love to hear it, obviously, and would encourage your participation.
Excellent. And I will make sure that we put that in the chat. Shri, do you have a closing comment?
Yeah, I will say, look, our doors are open, right? I mean, we have been extensively engaging with the industry, not just on the RFI and the chip shortage, but the broader CHIPS Act, the broader supply chain issues, the broader competitiveness issues, the broader Build Back Better agenda and the R&D agenda and the workforce agenda and what all those things mean for industry. So yes, there are, you have our contact information. We are happy to engage on any of those topics. If there are specific questions about the RFI, question 5A or 5B, I think there is a specific email address where you can submit those questions and we'll make sure that gets the right people. But if it's a broader discussion that you want to have about the state of the industry, about what the needs are, you have our direct contact information. You can certainly reach out to us.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Please give our best to the secretary. We know her well, and we know the excellence that she demands out of her team. So we're gonna hopefully we can help you guys and provide some more information. It's critical infrastructure issues. So we appreciate the chance to connect with you. And Shri, I know you have a call at 9:30. So thank you for your being with us. Thank you, Kevin. Gentlemen, have a great day. I'm going to hand this our next presentation. Jennifer, if you want to pop on, and Joanne and Max. We're now going to move to a panel discussion about supply chain. It's a very, very informative session there, Jennifer. I know you're going to lead a great panel here. So why don't I just hand this over to you? And I want to just thank Max Clay from Freudenberg and Joanne. Joanne, I never asked you how you pronounce your last name. I'm sorry.
It's Mavroides.
Joanne Mavroides from Abiomed. My bad on that. And Jennifer Petrosky from QAD, our host sponsor today. Jennifer, why don't you take this panel away? I have a lot to chew on after that discussion.
Yeah. Yes, that was a great discussion. So thanks for including them, and thanks for having me on today. I'm excited to lead this panel today with my distinguished panelists, Joanne and Max. Let's see here. Let me just kick this off. All right. So I thought Max and Joanne, before we get started, we could do just a brief introduction. I'll give folks a little bit of an introduction of QAD, and you guys can introduce yourselves, and then we'll jump right in. So I'm Jennifer Petrosky. I'm the Director of Life Sciences at QAD. I'm responsible for all things at QAD. And for those of you who don't know QAD, since 1998, QAD has served life sciences manufacturers worldwide, both large and small. And today we have over 600 GMP regulated sites in production worldwide. These life sciences manufacturers are delivering, all classes of medical devices, really in the mid-market space, but also pharma, biotech, CDMOs, and direct OEMs. So what solutions are these companies leveraging today? They are using our QAD's adaptive platform-based solution, which includes, of course, ERP, but we also have supply chain planning, demand planning, as we just heard, is very important to our industry. But we also have solutions for digital manufacturing and automation of the shop floor, as well as, of course, our enterprise quality management solution as well. So QAD's obviously new to MassMEDIC. This is actually our second event that we're sponsoring. We actually participated last month at the Abiomed device event in Boston. But I've certainly been involved with MassMEDIC for several years, working with Brian's predecessor, Tom Summer, when I was a part of Dassault Systems for about 13 years in a similar role, leading life sciences solution strategy, working with companies like yourselves, right, to understand your requirements so we can deliver, better solutions for you guys. So with that, a little bit of a commercial, sorry, but I wanted to just have that as a backdrop. Let me just turn it over to you, Joanne and Max, to do a brief introduction as well.
Sure. My name is Joanne Mavroides. I've been the Director of Supply Chain and Logistics at Abiomed for about 4.5 years now. Abiomed is a company that provides heart-saving and life-saving devices our Impella line, and most recently our new ECMO products. We are supporting not only the ongoing, number one killer of people, but also most recently have been utilized in COVID and pandemic response for people who's resulted in their COVID exposure has resulted in heart failure and myocarditis. So anyways, very glad to be here. Definitely, the supply chain is a very interesting place to be these days, and we'll welcome people's thoughts and questions.
Great.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. It's great to be here. I'm Max Klei. I'm the CEO of Freudenberg Medical. We are a supplier of components to the medical device and pharma industry, and we also develop and manufacture minimally invasive systems, so catheter systems. And we also have an end products business in the ENT space, where we manufacture and sell devices for patients who've had a laryngectomy. We have 11 sites worldwide, more than 1,900 people, and that makes us one of the bigger focused suppliers to the medical device industry in the world. Our headquarters is here in Beverly, Massachusetts. That is something that we decided a few years ago and actually set up the headquarters last year, so we're a fairly new addition to the Massachusetts medical device community.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. Okay, so today we put together a great program, and the idea here is to share our experiences, insights, lessons learned, right, and how COVID has changed medtech manufacturing, hopefully for the better. But also we'll share some experiences on how we're navigating post-pandemic challenges in the supply chain. So with that, we framed our discussion really around 3 areas: people, processes, and systems. So before we jump into people, I thought we could kind of take a quick step back and look at the early days, right? In early 2020, we saw extraordinary collaboration across our industries, but also throughout, the different industries. Manufacturing groups produced PPE, ventilators, semiconductors, sanitizer, that were all in short supply. So can you guys share with us your experiences on how you collaborated with your suppliers, customers, and even competitors?
So I can start quickly. So I think that, first and foremost, Abiomed was able to secure a large amount of PPE very early, before it became quite as much of a hot commodity. And we were able to share, $1 million worth of items to our hospitals, to our field teams, to our local responders, as well as, the community at large. So we're very, very happy to have done that. The other thing that we worked very closely with a lot of our suppliers, keeping very close touch on whether or not they were impacted by COVID and how that was going to impact us. Fortunately, we put a lot of processes in place internally. We started doing internal testing. We now offer vaccines on site, which is great for people. But and when I would talk to suppliers about that, we actually shared a lot of our experiences with, what we did to be able to get testing on site, what was required, the services that we had been able to secure, so that those services, especially domestically, could be used from some of our suppliers to keep that population safe as well. So I think that there was a lot of increased communication was probably that, but also knowledge sharing across the industry to, support each other from the pandemic standpoint.
Great. Alex?
Yeah, I think it was amazing how the industry came together to tackle the problems that arose. We are active in the diagnostic space for plastic components and ventilator components and tubing. In the early days, decision making processes, communication was really was very impressive how that worked, how quickly that worked, and how openly also information was exchanged and obstacles were moved out of the way. Freudenberg is one of the biggest manufacturers of nonwovens in the world, and we make melt-blown nonwovens. And so when it came to face masks, we were suddenly discovering that we were having one of the most priced commodities in the world. So that also led to us working together with mask manufacturers. We set out up our own mask manufacturing, both in the States, but also in Europe. And we also donated many masks to universities, to hospitals, to ENT practitioners in our field, and we're able to help them out. And that really led to a very cooperative relationship, and something that I'm glad to see is continuing. So I think the communication channels that were opened there, the mutual cooperation is fortunately something that is seems to be staying in place, and that's great to see.
Yes, agree. That's great. So that's kind of an external perspective. Let's take a look internal to your organizations. We all know the heroes of the pandemic are manufacturing teams, the production teams on the front line, but certainly the management teams, right? The business folks had to continue driving the company forward. So these guys typically work in a building, face to face, making decisions, but that obviously was impossible during the shutdown. So how have you guys been able to leverage remote workers during the pandemic, and do you see this continuing going forward? Joanne?
I guess I'll go again first. So I think that we had luckily a lot of foresight in our IT team and really invested in remote meetings. We have sites in manufacturing sites in both Germany and in the US. So we already had a lot of communication going between them, and we had been building up the quality of that communication, which come last March proved to be very fruitful, because we have spent our lives on Teams, and as many companies have across the world. I think that what we've learned from that is that you can be flexible. I don't think anything really replaces that camaraderie that you get when you see each other, which I'm glad that a lot of people are back in the office a lot of the time now, because I think that you do miss that, and you miss those hallway thoughts and conversations. And I think that innovation is tougher over Teams, but I think that you can we all proved that you can actually do work and be productive in a remote or a hybrid environment. And so we I think that that's the technology came at the right time to enable that. And I just want to reiterate the heroes part, because our production teams and our logistics teams across the world, they didn't have that luxury of being able to work from their home, right? They had to be in the office. They had to be able to produce and ship life-saving devices. And without those people, the rest of us that were able to have some flexibility wouldn't have been able to do what we needed to do to keep the company moving. So just, I know there's probably very few of those people on the line right now, but just that would be my main messages. Let's not forget about the people who are not successful at being able to work remotely.
Absolutely. Max?
Yeah, so our products are essential, our components are essential. So we kept manufacturing going. We never shut one of our sites down worldwide for a prolonged period of time. But of course, we sent the office staff home. Mm-hmm. And we were fortunate because we had made major IT investments in the year before. We had rolled out a global ERP system that allowed for remote connectivity. And so our transition was fairly seamless. It took a little bit of time, but I would say less than 2 weeks to get to accustomed to working from home, working remotely, to video conferencing, but then it worked fairly seamlessly for us. I think when we look at what's going to stay, I truly believe that flexibility is something that our employees will expect from us. If there's the opportunity to work from home, which is not the case for those who are in manufacturing or supporting manufacturing to the same extent. But those who have that opportunity also expect that they can use that, that they can stay, I don't know, half a day home if needed and work from home, or on a regular basis work one day from home. So I think that's something we have to factor in. I don't see offices going away. I think they're important for interaction. You want to be part of a team. You want to be part of a group of people. You don't want to sit in your office all day and work from home. So and we see that in the reaction of our people. Many of our people really cherish the opportunity to come back to the office, and so we don't have a problem of motivating people to come back.
Right, right. And certainly the flexibility is key, but can also be a double-edged sword, right? We talked about you can be 24/7 now at home, which is good and bad, of course. All right, well, let's switch over to processes. Supply chain disruption is upon us, and I think we talked about, Max, the whack-a-mole, right? As soon as we address one issue, another one seems to pop up. So maybe start with you, Max. How has this disruption impacted Freudenberg Medical?
Yeah, I think the breadth of the supply chain issues is unprecedented. Yeah, we've not seen that. We've seen it across different raw materials, different commodities, from steel to packaging to plastic resin to silicone. And for us, this is a daily problem. It's a daily challenge that we're working hard on. And we're working very closely with our suppliers to solve issues and move obstacles out of the way. I think the medical device industry overall is in a slightly better position than other industries, because often we're getting preference for certain raw materials. When I talk to my colleagues here at Freudenberg who are in the fast-moving consumer goods business, it's almost impossible to get certain materials that we still are able to obtain. On the other hand, of course, there's less flexibility on our side to switch from one supplier to the other, or from one material to the other. So that boxes us in a little bit. When I look at the overall situation, I think the one thing that gives us most headache at the moment is silicone. This is a material that, as you know, is in many medical devices. We are one of the largest players in the field, and we see that for different reasons: transportation, plant down situation, labor shortages. It is difficult to obtain that material, and there's also high demand, for example, due to the vaccine production, and they use a lot of silicone tubing. What puts us in a better position here is that we are one of the largest players, so we often get priority when it comes to obtaining the material, while we see that other smaller, more regional companies really struggle to get their hands on the material. So it's a daily fight. It's not over. It's going to continue well into next year. I think in most situations we see a little bit of an improvement, but it's going to remain a challenge.
Great. Joanne, your perspective.
Yeah, so we talked about everybody was very concerned at the beginning of COVID and all of the supply chain risks there. And I think that most of us, got through that portion where we were most concerned, and where we're really having the real pressure is now on the recovery, right? Because everything that had slowed down is now ramping up, and it's ramping up in a much faster mode than I think the suppliers were ready or able to supply. So definitely we're seeing the whack-a-mole a little bit. A few months ago when I spoke at a MassMEDIC, we talked about risk mitigation and what are some of the things that you have in place for risk mitigation, which from Abiomed's perspective, that's been great. I think that even with that, you still find issues and you still are chasing things and you're working with suppliers to improve allocations of things that are at risk. I think that the overall, Max said it's a whole bunch of different reasons, right? It could be environmental things. We've got the weather storms in Texas. We've got the flooding in northern Germany, right? There's a number of different things that will cause disruption that will go beyond the normal 3 to 6 months of safety stock that you hold on certain components. So we've there's been challenges, but with challenges there becomes opportunity to improve things, and we've actually identified, hey, what would we do differently? Every time there's a challenge, there's an opportunity to look at what would we do differently in preparation for the next time. And so it's opportunity to figure out what's better, what more we need to do to prevent any kind of shortages in the future, but also to work closely with the suppliers. And I think I talked about the last time, that relationship with suppliers is so important, right? That having that relationship and that transparency is going to win at the end of the day, because they'll have a better view of what you need and you have a better view of what their situation is. And I always say, tell me how to help you, help me, right? At the end of the day, we've got to kind of figure out how to help each other.
Right. I love that. Before you guys may have been talking right monthly or even a couple times a year, and now it's probably every week, if not every day. So collaborating.
In some situations, yes.
So Joanne, you talked about risk mitigation on the last session as well. Maybe can you talk about how you've added potentially more risk mitigation strategies in your supply chain?
Sure. I think that, everybody looks at, what are the key risks that you have. One is, having a sole source for something, or a risk of obsolescence with off-the-shelf components. And so we've got, we have a matrix that says, here's in these different situations, which suppliers do you need strategic agreements with? What Kanbans are you putting in place? How much safety stock are you reserving? So one of the things that we've been looking at is, how do we rank these things in terms of importance, right? So when we've stepped back and said, if you've got a sole source, is that more or less risk than someplace where you might have limited capacity, or is that more or less risk of obsolescence on a off-the-shelf product? And so we're trying to look at, is there a rating system that we can use to implement to really focus on that? Now, of course, you have to mitigate everything. I was in the electronics industry for a long time, and I said, if I'm missing a screw, I still can't build the computer, right? So in this case, if I'm missing a chip, I can't build the computer. If I'm missing a valve, I can't build the med device. So any one of those things can always hurt you. And so I think that, but there is a risk profile for components and for material. And that's where we're kind of trying to get to the next level. There is, how do we really measure, instead of kind of dealing with all the risks similarly, how do we really measure the risks that are more, could cause more issues than the others?
That's great advice. Max, what about on your side?
Yeah, I think Joanne made the point. It's really about resilience. It's about making the supply chains more robust. There are immediate measures that you can take. Higher safety stocks, for example, is one. And then there are midterm and long-term measures that you have to take, qualifying second sources. Local for local sourcing, I think, will be a big topic going forward, which should also help the US manufacturing industry. But we also see trends, for example, of production moving from China to Costa Rica, for example, or Malaysia, because of as a response to trade wars, but also to transportation shortages from certain regions. Yeah, I think really a risk-based approach to your supply chain assessing what are your key risks, what are the materials that may pose the problems in the future, and then addressing those with a targeted approach. I think that's the way to go.
Excellent. All right, well, we're going to switch over to the final area, and then we'll open it up to questions. So technology and systems. We've talked about it a little bit already, but when it comes to technology, life sciences manufacturers tend to be a little slower to adopt the latest and greatest software, just given our strict regulatory requirements, right? Once we validate our processes, we don't want to change it. It takes a lot of time and resources. However, one of the silver linings of this, situation has been a bit of an acceleration of technology adoption, I think. And even the FDA is certainly taken this on as well. Prior, to the pandemic, they were looking at things like case for quality, computer system assurance, right? And taken a more risk-based approach as well. And now they have the creation of the Office of Digital Transformation. So I think, there's a lot of acceleration of this discussion and adoption. So can you speak to your kind of digital transformation journey, if you will, and maybe where were you before? How did you, navigate, or how are you navigating, Joanne, to your point, right? This is the recovery mode is just turning out to be the biggest challenge. And what technology solutions have you adopted to help you navigate current disruption? Joanne?
I'm thinking from a supply chain standpoint, honestly, good old fashioned communication is probably the most important, right? Definitely ERP systems and having accurate information and having the systems to be able to support the basic functions of supply chain is very important. I think that from a Abiomed standpoint as a whole, we had invested in a cloud technology that allows not only our customer service, but also our field people and the physicians in hospitals to remotely see what was happening with patients in the hospitals. During, of course, during the early days, very few of our field people were able to get into hospitals to help the physicians and the nurses support cases. And it was, this tool has been incredibly valuable. And early on, before the pandemic, it's kind of, IT groups and hospitals are tight. They've got a lot of things they're responsible for, and it's tough to get new innovation into that environment. And with the pandemic, this tool that we had developed was incredibly useful. So therefore, we've been able to accelerate the introduction of this tool that we provide to the hospitals as a service to be able to better support them and their patients. And the response through the pandemic has been an order of magnitude from where it was, pre-pandemic. So I think that it will, as I said before, challenges produce innovation, and they produce, opportunities to be able to improve things for people. So that was that to us, I think, is the most extreme version of how we've leveraged the digital transformation and the cloud to be able to improve our services to our hospital customers.
Great. Max?
Yeah, digitalization is, of course, one of the key topics and priority for us going forward. There are certain things that are independent of the supply chain situation, like the trend towards smart devices, that will continue. Operationally, I think here in the pandemic, what was really key was having platforms, IT platforms, ERP platforms that allowed to cooperate and work remotely. I think that was one of the key things. And as I mentioned, our ERP system was something that we had updated and rolled out globally. And that really provided us with a robust platform to work from home. We were also able to move our call center for our ENT patients and clinicians off-site and run it basically from the call center operators or agents' homes, while maintaining let's say, the usual a normal surface to the patient, which was a big thing that our call center software and our ERP software allowed that. And then we found other things. So we run injection molding equipment, for example, that's manufactured in Europe, and it was impossible for a certain period of time to fly technicians in from Europe, and remote monitoring of performance, remote troubleshooting became very important, so that these machines can be hooked up to a network, that the controls can be read out remotely, that you can work on a solution that can be locally implemented. That was absolutely critical. So these are things that really helped us maintain the manufacturing performance during the pandemic.
Excellent. Well, with that, I think we have a couple minutes. We'll open it up to a few questions, Brian, if we have time. But thank you, Joanne, Max. I think there's a lot of insights that folks can leverage here, around improving, collaboration with suppliers. Think about your risk mitigation strategies, maybe prioritizing those critical items. Stay connected, right, and then leverage digital technologies as best you can. I love the remote monitoring, remote troubleshooting. I think that a lot of these things are here to stay. So thank you so much, Brian. Turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Max, you mentioned it, local vendors, local suppliers. Guys, what's the reality that you could be able to replace it? I mean, I'm sure you guys have looked into that. I mean, is it feasible to take a 200, 500 mile radius and get a lion's share of the supplies you need? Have you looked into sort of that local solution?
So I think that we've definitely, the Impella product was developed in Germany, right? So a lot of the original components for the product were in that area of Europe. And over time, we've definitely looked at, are there things that are our custom designs that we can get built other places as well. And so we've definitely done a lot of dual sourcing of certain components, because we have factories in both places. So having local factories that can support either factory, and that also provides that second source risk mitigation in cases, is definitely something. There's other things that are just too unique and we don't have the IP for, right? And so therefore moving that is, unless you're working with the supplier to create a new facility in a new geography, that's a little bit more difficult. But you can do it over time. Of course, there's regulatory across the world that you have to deal with anytime you do change a supplier or choose an alternate material.
Are you lining up redundant suppliers for almost all of your supplies? I understand that in Medtech, there are like some things that are only sourced in one place in the world. But, I mean, is there, for most of your supplies, you have redundant suppliers lined up, and is that feasible to handle from a sort of, from a business point of view?
I think the business part is feasible for sure. I think that, you have either supply agreements or you have splits with, agreements based on pricing and quality. I don't think it's always, you can't always find the right partner in multiple geographies, but, I'd say a good percentage of our parts, we have second sources. So that's not 100%, probably not as many as I'd like, but
right. Totally
more than a few.
So Max, I understand you are under a time constraint for you. I don't know if you have a second to answer that quick question or not. If not, then I can let you go. But
yeah, I have another 10 minutes. So
okay, great. Well, you mentioned the sort of local sourcing. I mean, Freudenberg is a very, very large company, but I mean, you set up stakes here in Massachusetts in order to take advantage of this ecosystem. Are there suppliers, vendors that you're looking at locally, or ones that you're looking for now that maybe you can kind of put a call out on?
I think, first of all, global supply chains are here to stay. And when we look at our raw materials, we're sourcing them from all over the world. But the pandemic clearly showed us that we have to make sure that we still have access to the materials, even if borders close or governments intervene into markets and don't allow for the materials to be exported. And so, yes, we are looking at local suppliers here in Massachusetts. We mostly process silicone materials. There's packaging materials. These are typically locally sourced. So these are the things that we're looking at locally. I think one of the key things is when you're offering your services to the local market, you still are within the boundaries of what economically makes sense. And this is a high labor cost region. So for us, the name of the game to be a good partner to our customers here is really automation. And we really have to make sure that our processes are state of the art, that we use digitalization to drive cost out of the manufacturing process and can be competitive here in the region. So there's many products and many things that you can do with that approach. But there are certainly certain things, that are so manual that it just doesn't make sense to provide them from here for the local market.
Yeah, since I have you, I mean, what was some of your decision making in making Massachusetts your global headquarters here? I mean, or your U.S. headquarters here. Sorry.
So clearly, the Boston cluster. This is one of the best regions for medical device development, manufacturing, for biotechnology, for pharma. So that played a huge role for us. And as we are here with MassMEDIC, you play a huge role in really bringing that community together. And it's fantastic to see how well it works. The other things for us is our corporate headquarters is in Europe. So proximity to Europe. Ireland is for us a very big manufacturing location with over 700 people that we have there. So the connections there, time zones, those are the things that, and of course, availability of highly trained staff. So when you run manufacturing here, or if you run a headquarter here where you need talent with medical device background, with great educational background, Massachusetts is one of the places to be.
Yeah, that's great. Joanne, I would imagine, I sort of imagine your office as being this crazy, big board factoring all these issues in. I mean, if you look at the tea leaves, global disruption of supply chain is going to be commonplace. If you think about, flooding, ocean level rise, things like that. How far out do you have to look in terms of understanding where your, where your capacity is in terms of supply, and how much has that changed over the past? Is it just COVID that's changed that? Or I know that before COVID, we had that massive hurricane in Puerto Rico that people didn't really talk about, but that definitely disrupted supply chains for the medical device industry. So,
yep.
How far ahead are you factoring this, and are you looking at sort of resiliency plans and flooding risks in regions that you're getting supply from?
Yeah, I think that in this past, just couple of years, right, we've had a number of environmental things that nobody would have anticipated. A 2-day ice storm in Texas would have wiped out the plastic resin market for a while, right? Yeah. So I'm not sure you can anticipate those things. I think that it does reinforce the fact that you need to have alternate sourcing or second sourcing of the same materials in different geographies. I think that it emphasizes, really looking at that balance between safety stock and Kanbans that you've got with strategic suppliers. But, in terms of how long you look out, when the electronics started getting kind of funky, we already had Kanban agreements with most of our electronic suppliers, but we extended them, right? So that was probably 9-10 months ago at the very beginning of this. And so we've actually, knock on wood, had very few electronics issues, but that was an area where we were looking out 12 to 18 months because, we've seen it in the electronics industry before. But in terms of some of these other things, I guess that, we're looking out, can we assure ourselves at least 12 months supply, because we know that it's going to take at least that much to recover in some, from some of these catastrophes. The Texas one is an example that industry is still just barely recovering. So
Yeah.
it's, it takes a while. And I think that you gotta make sure, can you secure the next year? Because I think to Max's expression, whack-a-mole, which was one of my favorite carnival games, was, you're not really sure where it's going to hit. So you have to try to, cover all your bases, and you're going to get hit by something that you would never have expected. From a risk standpoint, it's, whether it's a glue or a piece of plastic or a screw, right? You just never really know where it's going to be. So you have to, try to do the best you can from a supply chain standpoint to anticipate those. But I think trying to look out 2 or 3 years as to what that next thing is going to be, I'm not sure that any of us are that good.
Yeah, I would recommend maybe binging on science fiction, because I feel like ice storm in Texas I'm reminded of that old saying about something freezing over. Max, I know you got to jump. I really appreciate your insights today. Again, Max Clay from Freudenberg Medical, located here in Massachusetts. Thank you so much for setting up shop here. Really, really appreciate your insights today. Joanne,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
From Abiomed. Oh, we're so glad to have you. Thank you. And Joanne from Abiomed, again, our MVP, really appreciate your insights today. Thank you for joining us. And Jennifer and your team at QAD have been awesome. Thank you so much for your able guidance today. So we're going to move on now. Hey, Rachel, I wonder if you could pop on real quick and just maybe introduce the next speaker, or give us a, thank you, Joanne, give us a previews of any upcoming events our members should know about.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we kick over to Paul Orlando from Olympus, who's going to be giving us a bit of a reverse pitch and telling you a little bit about what Olympus is doing, I did want to give just a couple quick updates to make sure everybody's aware of what we have coming up for the next 6 weeks. It's hard to believe that we are 6 weeks out from the major holiday season and things kind of going into celebratory mode. So we hope that you'll stick with us for some more virtual programming during that time. Just to give you a little update on what's coming up, Tuesday, November 2nd, we have a session on Medtech enabled data. Wednesday, November 10th, we have a session on moving from the lab to the market. So that's sponsored by Sunrise Labs. You're definitely going to want to be in on that one. And then Tuesday, November 16th, Flex, one of our wonderful partners, is putting on a program about keeping up with at-home care. So that's going to be all about moving from hospital providers to home care, which will be really interesting to hear what Flex has to say about that. The other thing to keep on your radar is December 1st, we will be doing our last supplier showcase of the year. So we will be announcing more speakers coming up about that, but we're thrilled to have our sponsors who are so great supporting this program with QAD and Weidman, Steripac, and Thermo Fisher Scientific. So we could not do this without them. The other thing I wanted to keep you apprised on before we kick over to Paul as well is for those of you that don't know, all of our virtual programming for the last year and a half has been recorded. So anything that you've registered for or seen pop up and thought was interesting but couldn't actually make in real time, we do have videos for all of that programming. Most of that programming, the easiest way to find it is through our Vimeo session or our Vimeo site, which I'm actually going to put the link into the chat right now, so that you guys have it. And I'll make sure I do that right, when we pop off, so everyone has it. But there is a wealth of information and content there from the last 18 months. Programs on the FDA, anything regulatory, clinical, product development, legal expertise, women in medtech programs are all there, or past supplier showcases. So all of that programming is available for free, and you can definitely have that at your disposal. So with that little plug of what we have going on, I would like to introduce Paul Orlando, one of our wonderful partners at Olympus. We are absolutely so thrilled to have him back on the program. He participated in our very first virtual supplier showcase, oh gosh, over 18 months ago when the world went virtual. So
Yes.
Paul, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Great. Hey, good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen?
We do not see your screen.
Okay. I'm a bit challenged this morning. My area doesn't have power, so I'm running on limited batteries and things. So how about now?
Looks good. Yes. So you are in not in full screen mode. So if you want to go into presenter mode, we can see your slides on the side as well.
Okay, presenter mode. How would I do that? I'm sorry, Rachel. Rachel, any help with how I would go into presenter?
I think you're probably okay. We can see the slides. We can just see your other slides on the side, but it's totally fine.
Oh, okay. So why don't I just go with presentation? Here we go from the beginning. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining. So I am the head of procurement for OSTA, which is Olympus Surgical Technologies of America. So I'm the vice president of external operations, which is basically procurement for all the sites that we have in the US. Olympus, we just celebrated our 100-year anniversary a couple of years ago. Pretty much we started out as a microscope company that transitioned into cameras and then finally into medical. I'm going to give you a quick overview before we talk about the reverse pitch. So basically, we have two divisions. One is the endoscopic solutions division, which is mostly capital, and where we're mostly known for. 80% of all cases that require some type of scope basically uses an Olympic scope. Pretty much all capital intensive equipment, but if you kind of think of it, it's the C part of a procedure. You go in there and see the issue and then you treat it, and that falls under our Therapeutic Solutions division. And you can see here the range of products and spaces we offer across the therapeutic space: gastro, endotherapies, surgical energy, single-use instruments, urology products, and gynecology products. So again, we have Olympus, two divisions. Endo, you go see the issue, and therapeutics, you go treat it. What's exciting here is, a 100-year Japanese-owned company, and anybody that has a history with Olympics knows we haven't been the easiest company to interact with. 70% of the company's billion-dollar spend comes out of Japan, and most of the strategies in the past have been driven out of Japan. So as of 2 years ago, we decided to, or the senior board decided to have the therapeutic division headquartered in the U.S. This is where we have the biggest therapeutic market. Is a location where we have therapeutic device market leaders, close communication with the FDA. But I think what's most important for the folks on the call today is the reason why we did it is the US is where we have probably the best in breed partners to helping us create and implement solutions for new products and existing products. So this should be kind of a huge opportunity or win for any of you folks in the line that have been trying to penetrate Olympus over the years. So what I wanted to do before I get into the reverse pitch and provide opportunities for Q&A is just to kind of simplify what our structure is. I mean, in the past, probably 3 years ago, I couldn't imagine if you were a business development person trying to put an account plan for Olympus on, who are the contacts, who do they report into, and what are they responsible for? But I can say today that understanding how we're structured from a procurement standpoint is a lot simpler, right? So first, let me start with we have 3 different major regions, right? The OSTA in the US, OSTE in EMEA, in OMTA in the Asia Pacific. All it is OSTA surgical technologies of a particular region, right? So each region has a regional head. I'm the regional head for the Americas, and you can see there all the bulleted places we have plants as of today, but that is actively growing as we continue to acquire new companies. In Europe, we have 3 major hubs: Germany, England, and Czech Republic. And in UMTA, our major hubs for manufacturing, which drives procurement, is Japan and Vietnam. So the good news for everyone on the call is, okay, well, how do we penetrate and how do we get information about Olympus? You now can go to one person, right? So that would be, at a high level, me. And then underneath me, I have 2 pillars, which would be finished devices, or OEM, where we work with contract design and manufacturers. And then we have the kind of component side of the business, where we have suppliers that support us with components that go into our factories. And then during the Q&A session, I can talk a little bit more about, where we see the volume from where we see growth with our external partners. And it's pretty much set up the same in the other regions. Again, now the good news for folks trying to penetrate Olympus both regionally and globally is we now have a formal global governance. There will be, in the near future, a person in charge of global procurement. And myself and my 2 counterparts will be reporting into that entity. So now, if you're a regional supplier and you have global capabilities, it will be very easy for you to get exposure to what our needs are and what potential opportunities could be globally. We're now acting globally, where I sit on a global team with my counterparts. And one of the things we're focusing on now is our global strategies. Where do we see opportunities to leverage companies that can truly provide us global capabilities? 2 categories I can think of definitively would be in the electronic space, and the other would be in the kind of finished device design and contract manufacturing. Let me go into the reverse pitch, and then we'll just have set up things for questions. So, I was thinking about this a bit, and the first thing I would want to hear is how could you support global needs, right? And that doesn't mean you couldn't be a great and significant regional player, but as we're trying to do more or take more of a global approach, perhaps taking more of the spend out of Japan and having it in other areas, we're still going to have to support our factories in a global manner, right? So in our regions, if it's a finished, if we're trying to design and manufacture a finished device. So then what can you offer beyond the Me Too solutions or performance? It's difficult, I think, for a company that does molding or machining to come to Olympus and say, hey, give us a shot. Because, we have solid suppliers now, but if you can do something unique and have, some type of performance that is an industry leading capability, then we'd be interested. The one thing I would offer here is we do a lot of work with contract manufacturers. And when I was in business development years ago with a contract design and manufacturing house, I came to the conclusion that a lot of our customers for components were actually some of our competitors, the large contract manufacturers who do a lot of outsourcing of components. How can you help us launch better products faster? That's probably one of the biggest challenges at Ulster and Olympus right now. It's a continuous challenge to try to meet our headlines. Most of the products we want to launch, the market needs it, or our salespeople need it yesterday. Many of the products we develop are complex, and you have to manage and bundle many components from many suppliers. So any company that has experience in developing and assembling and making components for complex devices and helping us take out cost and lead time is certainly something we would want to hear about. And then how can we have a win-win relationship? How can we ensure both companies, or how would you offer a value proposition where at the end of the day, both companies benefit with the right QC, quality, cost, and delivery types of requirements? And then finally, often when I have conversations with companies that I think may be able to help us, I ask them, well, go to our portfolio and find some products or sub-assemblies or components and products that you think you could bring a unique expertise or solution. In one space, I could tell you right now, in the surgical energy space, everything has some type of vessel sealing jaw. That's an area that we continue to struggle with getting the machined part of the jaw meeting high tolerances and doing the overmolding. So that would be an example of get to our website, understand our products, what they do, and bring to us what you think could be a best in class or unique solution. So with that, I think 10 minutes into this, shall we do some Q&A, Rachel?
Yeah, that sounds great. So I'll kick things off, but I will encourage everybody to pop their questions in the Q&A if you have them. So Paul, I know, we work a lot with your counterparts at Olympus on the M&A and BD side of things, obviously where you also used to play.
Yep.
So how do you guys handle the onboarding of suppliers that kind of come with an acquisition? Is it usually you convert them quickly to the suppliers that are already on your list? Are they kind of sticking with the company throughout and getting added to your list? How does that work?
Great question. And I can tell you right now, the last acquisition we made and the one we're making now, we're actually trying to utilize our existing strategic partners. And that's where there's going to be huge opportunities. What's exciting in one case, we think we're going to be onboarding one of our potential large, I would just call it right now, contract manufacturers who we just decided will be our strategic partner. And then in another acquisition, the company we bought, the supply base isn't that stable. And we're in the process of transferring the componentry and subassembly and finished devices over to our suite of suppliers. And in some cases, they're new. But you said, what's not happening, you said, how do you do that fast? So that's where we need help. So we have needs, we know what we need, but again, it's the fast part we need help with.
Okay, that's understandable. And I don't think you're the only one in that boat, to be fair. So as we think about the way the supply chain, obviously we've done 2 programs now on the state of the supply chain and how things have shifted during COVID. How has Olympus kind of adjusted planning to make the supply chain more robust? Obviously, you're looking for very specific things, but what other kinds of actions are you guys taking internally to solidify all of your supply chain needs?
Great question. And the last 2 years have been challenging. COVID, we've had severe weather, geopolitical challenges, and when I have to put together a presentation for our board. Okay, Paul, what has been the impact of COVID and everything over the last 2 years, and what can we do to mitigate, right? So right now we're seeing for real cost increases. All of our suppliers having to deal with shortage of labor and cost of materials going up. Shortages in labor across the entire supplier base is an issue, including our own internal sites, and then managing with the shortages in some of the raw materials like plastics. So the first response is, well, how do you mitigate against all that, right? And then I was recently at a seminar and they said, maybe the world of just-in-time isn't the right, or just-in-time isn't the right way to go. You have to build more inventory, but then how do you build more inventory when you have all these shortages? At the end of the day, what my team has been saying is, Paul, hey, the area, why we haven't been hurt that much in the past, because we have good partners who, for instance, our plastic suppliers, we've already in our agreement require them to carry so much resin in case there is an issue. So I think it's difficult to be reactive in this current state and just continue with your, how to best partner with suppliers and OEMs and you know, you never can predict this stuff, but it's just to me what my team is telling me and what I'm seeing. It's the basics, right? It sounds simplistic, but there's no silver bullet in my opinion.
Yep, that makes sense. All right, I'll give you 2 real quick ones and then we'll let you go because I know your batteries is dying.
And actually, my computer's ready to die in about 5 minutes.
We'll do 2 quick ones.
All right.
So is your AVL separated by division, or if a supplier is working with one particular group, are they already approved for a different group, or do they have to go through a different process now?
Perfect.
It seems like you consolidated all that.
We're trying.
Okay.
I would say over the next couple of years we'll get there. I've been surprised on how difficult it has been, honestly, to kind of harmonize approved supplier lists globally. You know, it's amazing sometimes the bureaucracy you have to go through just to create an NDA that can be used globally. It's a struggle, but we're getting there.
Okay, that makes sense. I completely understand. It's going to take a while, obviously. But okay, last question. As medical devices are becoming more software driven, how are you working with partners who can help drive that type of innovation, right? A lot of your stuff is very capital intensive.
Right.
But software is obviously a big one. So what are you guys doing a lot of that internally, or are you working with external partners?
A great question, and it couldn't be more timely. An acquisition we're going through now is so we're starting to lose software engineers. There's a shortage of them in the marketplace, and we are now hoping our strategic partners in that space can handle the heavy load. So I know Olympus for sure in the last 3 years have been doing more work or having our partners do more of the development work, and I see that only to continue. And it's I see more and more of our supplier base bolting on development capabilities. So if I was a supplier that could do manufacturing and have some level of component vertical integration, I would say bolt on some type of development capabilities and you're good to go.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we will let you go before your computer dies, but last question. People should reach out on LinkedIn if they want to chat with you. What's the best way to kind of connect with the folks at Olympus?
Start with LinkedIn, you know, and it's, you know, with things are very, very hectic, and usually I do a pretty good job if the request resonates and it makes sense. So I would say I'm pretty responsive to some level of cold calling.
But it comes back to what you're saying. Know the products, know the components, and understand what the value is. If you make it very clear, it's easy for you to respond.
Yeah. For instance, hey, I'd like to talk to you about our design capabilities. Well, that's not gonna make it.
Yeah, right. Completely understand. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Anybody on the South Shore, hang in there. Hopefully we'll have power in a couple of days.
Oh my goodness. All right, Brian, I will turn things over to you to wrap us up.
Thank you, Rachel. Paul, heroic performance in the face of wild animals and power shortage, working on nothing but battery. God, what a great program today. I want to thank our guests from the Department of Commerce. I want to thank our guests from Freudenberg Medical, Abiomed, QAD, and I want to especially thank Paul, working out of a powerless location on the South Shore, for his insights on Olympus. Thank you again for joining us today for another MassMEDIC Supplier Showcase. This program was brought to you by Thermo Fisher Scientific, Steripack, Weedman, and our host sponsor today, QAD. Please stay tuned for many more programs, and we will see you guys at the next one. So thank you and have a great day. Be safe, be well, and be productive. Take care.